So, reflecting upon the lesson demonstration and implementation at Bartley Elementary for our PED 352 class teaching 4th graders and kindergartners a nutrition lesson, I thought the experience overall went very well. They were very well engaged. They're exceptionally well behaved, more than I thought they would be. Just basic classroom management, attention maintaining issues. I think they grasped overall what we wanted them to get out of the lesson. I think for the 4th graders, they did understand in the end what the 6 essential nutrients were, what their purpose in the body was, what their function was. They understood examples of the nutrients. They really liked the nutrient song. That went over very well. And I think by the end they were able to process what it was that these foods give us regarding nutrients and how we didn't really get into how much of them they should eat. Unfortunately, I just don't think we were going to have time for that. We also decided that if we were to actually implement the full lesson plan in the future, we would split the days up. We didn't get to the nutrition label portion of the lesson, the reading of the activity, the scavenger hunt. We didn't manage to make it to that today, which we kind of expected because it didn't happen when we did the lesson demonstration for the class as a whole either. So that would be an excellent place to break the lesson up into two. You'd have one day going over the nutrients themselves, talking about them, discussing them, where you would find them in real life, what foods, and the purposes and functions of them in the human body. And then the second day would be translating those nutrients over into how to read a nutrition label and how to apply that information in everyday life. For the kindergartners, we did manage to make it all the way through the whole lesson. It got cut a little short at the end with identifying the sources of foods, but overall I think they had a firmer grasp on what we were trying to convey, on whether or not they understood how to categorize food. They did a really good job connecting, once we provided examples, that these are foods that are grains, these are proteins, fruits, vegetables, dairy. Obviously, kindergartners are probably more example-based at this point. They don't have the capacity to understand all of that goes behind categorizing the different foods, especially since this was a 1st grade standard that we modified for kindergarten. But I think they did very well. Regarding data that we collected that showed they did well, the 4th graders had the matching activity where they had the nutrients laid out, and they had to match pictures of food and the description of the function of the nutrient within the human body. And I would say we had 2 pairs that did it, and I would say both of them had it about 75% right with a little encouragement, maybe 80-85%. They did pretty well. They identified the proteins, the fats, and the carbohydrates very well. It was just vitamins and minerals they seemed to have issues with. And we spent a lot of time discussing what a plate would look like that had all of the essential nutrients on it. And I remember I talked with the 2 I worked with very much about how foods fit into more than one category of nutrients, how dried fruit and nuts and trail mix would fit into almost all of the categories. So I think they actually did very well, and I think they walked away knowing that there are all these essential nutrients that you need. We had a lot of questions about fats and how fats supposedly make you fat, and so I had to spend a little bit of time talking about how fat is just another nutrient and the body still needs it in order to work. So I think they walked away with more information, and I think they did fairly well. We unfortunately didn't have time for a pre-assessment, which I think would have helped enormously, especially if we had to build more background knowledge and had time to activate more background knowledge on the food. That was built into our morning meeting when we did the lesson originally, and of course we didn't have time for a morning meeting because that would have been the entire time we were there. But I think overall they did a fairly good job, and we did a good job, Becca and I, of presenting the information. The kindergarten lesson also did really well. As it was more of a talking them through, again, like, because when they had the food, they were supposed to go to the spot on the My Plate diagram on where category it would go into: grains, protein, fruits, vegetables, and dairy. With the prompting, they managed to do it accurately every time. I'm not going to say if left to their own devices they could have done it, but I think once we talked them through the thought process, they understood, okay, pasta is a grain because it's made usually from wheat. And obviously the fruits and vegetables were very easy to identify. Dairy, as soon as they recognized that it was milk, they managed to go right over to the dairy spot. Protein and carbs. Protein was a little harder just because it was such a large category and because so many things fit into the protein category, but as soon as we talked them through, they understood that, and so I think they did fairly well. The plants and animals activity, I think we could have spent a little more time on. I wish we could have, and collected more data on. If we had better knowledge of what they thought in regards to where food comes from, I think we could have been better prepared to teach them and or reinforce that information. There's a lot of confusion on like grains. Where do some of the grains come from? Like cereal, does it come from a plant or animal? Obviously, they got meat right most of the time. Meat, fish, eggs, they got right most of the time. Dairy we had some trouble with, mostly just because I think that's kind of an abstract concept to them still as to where this food comes from. And we didn't have any basis of, we didn't have what their current level of background knowledge was about that. So I think if we had that, we could have collected firmer data on that. So we didn't do very well in that category. I would say probably every question, at least one person got it wrong, usually 2 or 3. But I think if we had more examples and more time, we could have gotten that down to maybe 1 person wrong every time. So, but I think overall they did grasp what we were trying to get to them. And I definitely think it connected to their lives. With both of them, we tried to pull examples that we see every day, that they would probably see every day. The kindergartners, we started off the lesson asking what they had for breakfast as a way to transition into this new lesson about nutrition using something that they knew intimately. Cereal was a big thing for kindergartners. Cereal and donuts. And then for the 4th graders, we started with the music, hoping that they would get their attention. They wanted to freeze dance, so we altered our lesson a little bit on the fly, and we freeze danced to the song and asked review questions. And so I think it definitely offered a strong engagement for both of them by connecting to their lives. And obviously, we used examples of food that they would see every day. So, And I think the activities themselves were good. Now that I think about it, I don't know if they would have been as effective on a larger scale. Maybe in a center scenario if we had groups. But definitely the My Plate activity where students had the food and they had to identify which category it went into. I think that would be just confusing and difficult to manage if it was in a full classroom setting. I think small groups you could make it work just fine like we did, and the 4th grade activity, I think the scavenger hunt would work very well. Obviously, you'd have to have more supplies when it came to the nutrition label scavenger hunt, and you'd have to allot a lot more time. But I think it would work very well in a large class setting. And I think the matching activity is good for cooperative work at tables, especially, because there was a lot of discussion going on, even with just the 4 kids we had. They were talking about it. And when we did the official lesson demonstration, there was a lot of good meaningful discussion about where this food should go and what do we already know and what do we remember from the video. So, and I think the activities themselves had just enough movement. I'm kind of glad that the 4th graders decided they wanted to get up and do like a freeze dance with the song. I think that got some of their kinesthetic needs out of the way. Let's say they were very high energy. So, and then obviously the kindergartners, we had them up and moving for a good portion of the time. Mostly just because we knew that they weren't going to be able to sit still the whole time unless we were really pushing the activities at them. So, but I think they did. They connected to their lives. The activities were enjoyable. They were not necessarily high rigor level, but I think for a new person coming in, trying to give them new information, especially the first time, we didn't really want that high rigor level for the activities. We wanted them to be engaging and for them to take away the basics of the information rather than in-depth information. I think the assessments could have used a little more development. I think Becca and I probably could have taken more data on it, taken tally marks, but most of the time our classroom management skills are not fully developed, let's say. So we were still doing a lot of watching, making sure everyone was paying attention and not trusting them to do it themselves and to keep themselves engaged. So I think if we had time for the kindergarten lesson, we could have taken data and done tally marks each time somebody got the food category right or the source right, but we simply didn't have time and didn't plan for it in this lesson. And I think for the 4th graders, obviously we would collect the scavenger hunts for the nutrition label activity and use that as a formative assessment on whether or not they understood it. And the matching activity, we were both watching, so it was a very informal formative assessment. We were watching them and seeing how much they could do on their own before we needed to step in. And both of us agreed that they did pretty well. I wouldn't say 100%, but I would definitely say 75%. They retained a good portion of the information. So again, we didn't really plan for any formal assessments just because we didn't want to do pencil and paper, and we didn't want to take too much data in order to take ourselves away from what was going on. So obviously if this were in a classroom setting and we had established all the classroom rules and procedures, then more thought should be put into the assessment. So, and yes, we definitely modified as we went along. Becca and I had moments where we were like, we're gonna change the lesson plan completely. Freeze dance for the 4th graders was not in the plan at all. Neither was playing the video more than once, but they really liked the video and they needed a chance to move and they wanted to do freeze dance. So we asked questions every time they froze regarding the video, and I think they did pretty well. We obviously we also modified the matching activity a little bit. We originally thought they were going to do it in the group as a whole, and then we just looked at the group dynamic and saw that it would work better when we split them up into pairs, and that they both ended up talking about different things, and they both brought really good points to the matching activity. So I thought that was good personally. We ended up not doing the mixed pair share that we did in the original demonstration with our class. We kind of changed that into the freeze dance as it happened, but the mixed pair share, we also just didn't have a large enough group for it to be effective. We theoretically could have done a stand-up, hand-up, pair-up, but again, with only 4 people, there's only 3 other people to match with. So we did modify that one quite a bit. We kept all the information that we was given and the basic nature of the questions the same, but the presentation and the cooperative strategies did change quite a bit. The kindergarten lesson actually stayed the same for the most part. We didn't really modify anything. I think given more time to prepare feasibly, and I think if we had more resources available, it would have been nice to have like full color pictures of the food as an easier way, or like maybe whiteboards to write answers. The source of the food activity where students held up either the P for the plant or the A for animal, I wish we'd had something there to support the information that they were given and trying to grasp on whether or not where food came from. I almost wish we had found either like a video or had a picture book that explained it, especially for kindergartners, but I think we modified it well enough that we took the time to explain, and I think through examples they were starting to get it. They were reaching that point of being able to understand. I would say probably like a level 1 on Bloom's taxonomy, which is pretty good. It was a 1st grade standard that we did our best to modify for kindergarten. So, and I think we did our expectations pretty well. I think we definitely could have set our goals better. We both completely forgot about, the I can statements or the I will statements at the beginning of the lesson that we did when we did the first demonstration, setting those goals. We did talk about what they were going to learn about today, and we did discuss briefly what it was they were all here for. Obviously, we're going to learn about the nutrients for the 4th graders and how food fits into different categories for the kindergartners, but I think the expectations probably could have been a little clearer, especially the class management expectations. Kids are in a gym, they're excited, there's new people around, they've broken their daily routine. We probably should have set clearer 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, and those classroom management procedures. But overall, I think both of us did pretty well at keeping them on track for someone who doesn't consistently work with 4th and kindergartners. And then I thought they were very engaged personally. Aside from the, expected short attention span, wandering off, trying to futz with whatever they had in their hands, which is totally normal. But I think especially the kindergartners showed a lot of engagement. They wanted to talk about, they wanted to raise their hand. And the 4th graders, when we had the video and the freeze dance, they were definitely doing their best to stay engaged. I almost think it's good that we didn't get into the nutrition label activity. I think that would have lost them at that point, the 4th graders. They really liked the matching activity. They sat right down and got right into it. So they showed their engagement through a very open posture, not necessarily completely focused attention, but eager to come to attention, I would say, for both the kindergartners and 4th graders. they definitely got off track, but they weren't difficult to corral back on track, which I think was really good. So yeah, I thought they enjoyed it. I thought they got something out of it. And then, what did I learn about the students? If I were to teach again, what would I do differently? I think I learned about the students that sometimes we overestimate what we're going to have time for and what their immediate capabilities are. Becca and I had very thorough lesson plans. We had lots of scripted questions. We had, I think, a lot of prior expectations about them that some of them were totally unwarranted and some of them were pretty much on the dot. We expected that the fourth graders might have heard of some of the nutrients before, like fats, carbs, proteins, vitamins. I asked them how many of them took vitamins in the morning, and all of them raised their hand. So they all knew what a vitamin was. I think we just had a little bit of expectations that were above maybe where they were to start with. We were expecting more of a they had been introduced to the information previously and that we were going to build on that. And I think we needed to remind ourselves that we were starting from point zero. So if I were to do that and I were to include the morning meeting, I would, for the fourth graders, definitely make sure we were starting at ground zero, assuming they knew nothing or very little about the nutrients, and taking more time to explain them in depth with more resources available. And for the kindergartners, that was kind of just a shot in the dark. There wasn't an actual standard there, so we modified it best we could from the first grade standard. And I think if we were to do it again, I think we would have, again, more resources. I'd love to have a video that explains where food comes from, or a picture book to do a read aloud with. I would like to have more pictures and more examples, and definitely ones in color. But I think the My Plate activity, having them stand on the plate itself, was very fun for them. It would have been cool to actually have a huge My Plate and a glass of milk for them to go to, but wasn't feasible with the resources we had. So overall, I was pretty happy with it. It gave me a chance to test some of the few class management skills I did know, and it reminded me how much I enjoyed teaching little kids and how much I enjoyed interacting with them regularly, and how much they liked knowing things that they didn't think they knew previously. The kindergartner's face when we told them that protein involved chicken and meat and beef and fish and eggs and cheese, and they were all like, what? Cheese fits in more than one category? They thought it was interesting. The fourth graders thought the video was awesome, and the fact that they wanted to freeze dance to it was kind of a shock, because you get around people your own age and they don't want to do things that are uncool, and fourth graders are like, but that's cool. And so I would definitely do it again, and I think Becca and I could have spent more time on the development of the implementation portion of it, but I think our lesson plans were really well thought out, and I think if we gave them to a substitute or a more experienced teacher, they would be able to carry out the information effectively. So that's my reflection.